she said. We're basically over. I just haven't told you yet. I looked at her and said, now you don't have to. I packed my things that night and made sure there was nothing left for her to come back to. Hey viewers, before we move on to the video, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button if you want to see more stories like this. Thanks. We're basically over. She said it the same way someone announces they're out of milk. Flat, unbothered, like the sentence had been sitting on the tip of her tongue for weeks, and she'd finally just gotten tired of holding it there. I was standing at the kitchen counter, still holding a fork, midway through a plate of pasta I'd cooked for both of us. She didn't even look up from her phone. I just haven't told you yet. That second part is what did it. Because the first sentence? I could have argued with that. I could have pushed back, asked what she meant, demanded a conversation. But that second sentence took all of that away. She wasn't announcing an ending. She was telling me she had already decided, already processed it, already moved on in her head, and now she was just informing me. Like I was the last person on a list to notify. I set the fork down slowly. Not dramatically. I didn't slam it. I didn't flip the plate. I just set it down because my hands suddenly didn't know what to do with themselves. And I looked at her. She still hadn't looked at me. She was scrolling something on her phone, one leg folded under her on the couch, hair pulled up, wearing the hoodie I'd given her 2 Christmases ago. She looked completely comfortable, completely at ease. And I realized, right then, she had been at ease for a long time now. While I had been trying, while I had been worrying, while I had been lying awake at night thinking about what I was doing wrong and how to fix it, and whether we were okay, she had already checked out. She had already packed her emotional bags and left. She just hadn't moved her physical things yet. I stared at her for a long moment. And then something in me, something I'd been holding down for months without even knowing it, finally let go. Now you don't have to. I said it quietly. She looked up then. For the first time in the entire exchange, she actually looked at me. And I saw it, just for a second, a flicker of something crossing her face. Not remorse. Not regret. More like surprise. Like she hadn't expected me to respond that way. Like she'd expected tears, or an argument, or begging. But I wasn't going to give her any of that. I walked to the bedroom, opened the closet, pulled out my large duffel bag from the top shelf, and I started packing. Let me tell you something first. I'm 32 years old, and I had been with Cassie for 3 years, for months, and 11 days. Not that I was counting. We met at a mutual friend's birthday party, one of those rooftop things where everyone's a little too loud and the drinks are a little too warm. She was standing near the railing, looking out over the city like she was bored with the whole night already. I thought that was interesting. I walked over. She made me work for the conversation, but once it started, it didn't stop for 4 hours. We exchanged numbers. She texted first, which she later denied. And 6 months in, we moved into an apartment together because it made sense financially and emotionally, and because I was, genuinely, completely in love with her. That's the context. That's the whole context. 3 years. An apartment we picked out together. A shared Netflix account, shared groceries, shared inside jokes, shared a dog for about 8 months until Cassie decided she didn't want the responsibility anymore, and we had to rehome her, which still hurts to think about. 3 years of birthdays and arguments and makeup and inside jokes, and the kind of comfort that takes a long time to build and very little time to destroy. All of it. In one sentence, delivered to her phone screen. I need to be honest about something before I keep going. Things had not been good for a while. I knew that. I wasn't walking around blind. There had been a shift in Cassie, a gradual cooling, like the way a room loses heat slowly enough that you don't notice until you're already cold. It started around 8 or 9 months ago, if I had to put a date on it. She stopped initiating conversations. Not in the dramatic way, not overnight, just slowly, over time. I noticed that I was always the one to say, "How was your day?" first. I was always the one to suggest plans. I was always the one texting first when we weren't in the same room. And she'd respond. She wouldn't ignore me, but there was a difference in the energy of her responses. Like she was replying out of politeness. Like I was someone she didn't want to be rude to, not someone she was excited to hear from. I noticed. I just didn't say anything, because I was afraid of what she'd say back. There's a particular kind of fear that comes with loving someone who you can feel pulling away. You don't want to acknowledge it out loud, because as long as you don't say it, it's not completely real. As long as you stay quiet and keep hoping, there's still a version of reality where you're wrong about everything you're sensing. So I stayed quiet. I tried harder. I planned a weekend trip, somewhere about 2 hours north, a cabin near a lake, The kind of trip we used to talk about taking in our first year together. She said she wasn't feeling it, that she was tired from work. That maybe next month. Next month never came. I booked a dinner reservation at this restaurant she'd mentioned months earlier, the kind of place with a wait list and cloth napkins and a menu that takes 10 minutes to read. She seemed pleased for about 45 minutes. Then she was on her phone for most of the main course. I made excuses for her in my head. Work stress, family stuff she wasn't sharing. Just a rough season. Every relationship has rough seasons. I told myself that. I told myself that a lot. My friend Owen saw it before I did. Or at least, he was willing to say it out loud before I was. We'd grabbed lunch about 5 months ago, just the two of us. The kind of casual catch-up where you actually end up talking about real things because there's no one else around to keep things surface level. He asked how things were with Cassie. I said fine. He gave me a look. That look. The one where someone doesn't believe you, but they're deciding whether to push it or let you live in your comfortable life for a little longer. He pushed it. You seem tired, he said. I told him I'd been sleeping badly. Not that kind of tired. I didn't answer. He leaned back in his chair and looked at me for a moment like he was choosing his words carefully. I'm going to say something, and I want you to just hear it without getting defensive. I told him to go ahead. Cassie has been different since the end of last summer. And I don't mean different with me. I mean different with you. The way she talks about plans with you. It's like she's talking about something she has to do, not something she wants to do. I told him he was reading too much into it. He shrugged. Maybe. He let it sit there. But you know I'm right. I changed the subject. He let me. But that conversation had weight to it. It stayed with me. Because the thing about hearing something you already know from someone else's mouth is that it becomes real in a different way. You can dismiss your own thoughts as anxiety, insecurity, overthinking. You can't dismiss them quite as easily when they come from someone who loves you and has no reason to lie. I thought about that conversation on the drive home. And then I parked the car, walked upstairs, and Cassie smiled at me from the couch and asked if I was hungry, and I told myself Owen was wrong. I made myself believe it because I needed to. The months between that lunch and the dinner where she said those words, were a specific kind of slow torture. Not explosive, nothing dramatic. Just the accumulation of small moments that, on their own, meant nothing, but stacked together, told a story I didn't want to read. The way she'd turn away in bed. Not dramatically, not every night, just more often. The way she'd make plans with her friends without mentioning them to me until the day of, and I'd realized that at some point I had stopped being the first person she thought to include. The way she'd laugh, genuinely, freely, at videos on her phone, and then I'd try to join in, ask what she was watching, and the laugh would quiet. Not disappear, just quiet. Like my presence dimmed something for her. I started spending more time in the spare room we used as a home office. Not because I was angry, just because it felt easier than sitting on the couch together and feeling the distance between us even though we were 18 inches apart. I started calling my brother more. Started going to the gym earlier in the morning before she was awake, because the morning was the one part of the day that felt completely mine. I was building a life around the edges of her absence, and I didn't even fully realize I was doing it. 3 weeks before the dinner, something happened. Small thing. But I think about it now and realize it was the moment I stopped being able to ignore the truth, even if I kept trying. I had a work thing, a presentation I'd been preparing for about a month, the kind of thing that actually mattered for where my career was heading. I came home that day. Not great. Not terrible. The presentation went well, but the decision was still pending, and I was in that uncomfortable in-between space where you've done everything right, and now you just wait. I told Cassie about it over dinner. She listened, or she appeared to listen, but she asked 0 follow-up questions. Not one. Not what happens next, or how long until you hear back, or even how do you feel about it. Nothing. She finished her food and said, "That's good," and asked if I'd seen that the streaming service was adding a new season of something she'd been watching. I sat there, and I thought, a stranger would have asked more questions. A coworker I barely knew would have asked more questions. The woman I lived with, the woman I had built 3 years of my life around, responded to the most significant work moment I'd had in 2 years with "That's good." I nodded about the streaming show. I helped clear the plates. I went to the office room. I sat at my desk and stared at the wall for a while. And I thought about Owen's words. And I thought, okay, I see it. I didn't say anything that night, but I saw it. Here's the thing about Cassie that I only fully understood later. She had a pattern. I didn't know it at the time because you don't get to read the owner's manual on someone when you fall in love with them. You get to know them the way they want to be known, slowly, through what they show you. Her pattern, and I pieced this together afterward, from conversations with people who knew her before me, was that she never ended relationships. She just stopped being in them. She'd check out slowly, pull back emotionally, create just enough distance that things became unbearable, and then she'd wait. Wait for the other person to either say something or give up. Wait until the ending was inevitable, and then let the other person be the one to technically name it. It let her feel clean about it. She got to be the one who didn't technically end it. She'd gotten through 2 significant relationships this way. I know this because after everything happened, I ran into one of her exes, a guy named Fletcher I'd met maybe twice at group events, and we ended up having the most uncomfortable but clarifying conversation of my entire year. He looked at me and said, almost immediately, "She did the slow fade, didn't she?" I didn't say anything. He nodded. "She checks out first, waits for you to catch up, never has the actual conversation." He wasn't bitter when he said it. He just said it like a fact, like he'd spent a long time making peace with it. But that conversation was after. That night, at the dinner, standing in the kitchen with my fork and her voice still hanging in the air. I didn't know any of that yet. What I knew was simpler. What I knew was, she had already decided, and I was done fighting for something she'd already walked away from. I packed methodically. That surprised me, honestly. I expected to feel shaky. I expected emotion to get in the way. But I was calm in a way I hadn't been in months. Like clarity had arrived in the strangest form. Like the thing I had been dreading had finally happened, and the dread was gone, replaced by something cooler, steadier. I packed my clothes first. Not everything, not every last shirt, the things that mattered. The duffel filled up fast. I moved to the bathroom. My things were in a specific corner of the counter, the corner I'd been assigned through the unspoken negotiation of 2 people sharing space. My razor. My deodorant. The water bottle I left on the counter every night. I took all of it. I went to the home office. My work laptop. The external hard drive. The leather notebook I kept on the desk, which had 3 years of miscellaneous notes and ideas and sketches in it. Things I'd never want to lose. The small framed print that hung above the desk. The one I'd bought at a market years before I even met her. The one that had always been mine. I took it down. Cassie hadn't moved from the couch. I could hear the TV from the bedroom. She'd turned it on sometime after I walked away, turned the volume up a little, I noticed. Background noise. Something to fill the space where our relationship used to be. I went to the bookshelf in the living room. My books were easy to identify. We had different tastes. Always had. And the shelf was essentially divided without ever being explicitly divided. I took mine. About 11 books. I stacked them by the door. I stood in the doorway of the living room and looked at her. She was watching the TV. Her face was unreadable. Or maybe I just wasn't trying to read it anymore. "I'm going to stay at Owen's tonight," I said. She didn't look away from the screen. "Okay. Just that." "Okay. No, wait. No, can we talk about this?" "No, I didn't mean it like that." "Okay." I picked up my bag. I picked up the stack of books. I went back to the bedroom and grabbed the small wooden box I kept on the nightstand, the one that had my watch, some cash, a few other personal things, and I put it in my bag. I stood in the bedroom one more time. I looked at the bed we'd shared. I looked at the photo on her dresser, the one of the 2 of us from a trip we'd taken maybe 18 months ago, when things were still good, when we were still laughing easily together, standing somewhere with trees and a blue sky, and 2 people who had no idea what was waiting for them. I left the photo. It wasn't mine to take. I walked out. Owen opened the door at almost 11 at night, without a single question. He just looked at me, looked at the bag over my shoulder, and stepped back to let me in. He made tea. He didn't say anything for a while. We sat in his kitchen and I told him what happened. Not all of it. Not right then, just the sentence. The sentence she'd said. He put his mug down very slowly. "She actually said that." I told him she had. He was quiet for a moment. "What did you say?" I told him. He looked at me for a long moment. And then he said, "Good. Just that. Good." And somehow that one word, from someone who had watched me spend months convincing myself I was imagining things, that word carried more weight than an entire speech would have. I slept on his couch that night. Slept better than I had in months. The next morning came the texts. First one at 8:14 a.m. "Hey, are you okay?" I looked at it for a while. The question struck me as strange. She told me we were basically over and hadn't bothered to work up much emotion about it. And now she was asking if I was okay. I didn't respond. Second text came at 10:30. "I think we should talk." Last night got weird. Got weird. Like it was a dinner party that had taken a strange turn. Like something unfortunate had happened to the two of us. Something external, rather than words she had chosen and spoken out loud. Got weird. I put my phone face down. Owen made breakfast. We talked about normal things, his work, a trip he was planning, sports. He didn't push me to talk about Cassie unless I wanted to. That's the thing about good friends. They know when to give you the space to just exist without requiring you to process everything out loud. I was grateful for that. Third text came just before noon. I didn't mean it the way it came out. Can you just call me? That one I sat with for longer. There it was. The retreat. The backpedaling. The softening. I had been waiting for 3 years to see this side of her. The vulnerable side. The side that reached out. The side that showed she cared enough to fight for something. And now here it was. And it had come too late. Not by a day. Not by a week. By months. By all the months she'd been slowly withdrawing while I'd been slowly drowning. And she'd let me sink rather than reach in a hand. The reaching only happened now because I'd left the room. And I think I understood something, sitting there in Owen's kitchen, about the nature of people who only show up when you start walking away. I had become a comfort she took for granted. A constant she'd stopped thinking about the same way you stop thinking about furniture. It's always there. You don't really see it until it moves. I had been furniture to her. I had been arrangement. I had been the background of her life, not a foreground presence. And she had expected me to stay being that. She hadn't expected me to pick up my books and my watch and my notebook and walk out the door at 11 o'clock at night. She'd expected the argument. She'd expected the begging. She'd expected me to ask her what she meant, to try to fix it, to do the emotional labor of ending something she had already ended inside her head. Instead, I'd done the one thing she hadn't planned for. I'd agreed with her. I didn't go back to the apartment for 3 days. When I did, it was a Tuesday afternoon, while Cassie was at work. I hadn't announced I was coming. I still had my key. I let myself in. The apartment was the same, but it felt different, smaller somehow, like a space I no longer belonged to. I moved through it with purpose. I was not there to look around. I was not there to sit in the memories. I was there to complete what I'd started. There were things I'd left because I hadn't thought of them, or because I couldn't carry them all in one bag. The rest of my clothes, my gym equipment, just a few things, resistance bands, my jump rope, the spare pair of sneakers by the front door. The kitchen had a few things that were mine, a specific pan I'd had before we moved in together, a set of spices I'd bought. I took them. There were things in the shared spaces that were ambiguous, things we'd accumulated together, things neither of us had a stronger claim to. I left those. I wasn't interested in claiming territory. I was interested in taking back myself. There's a difference. I stood in the spare room, the office, for a few minutes. The desk was still there, the chair, the small lamp. Those had been here when we moved in. They weren't mine. But the things that were mine, every paper, every file, every piece of anything that carried my name or my handwriting, I took. The last thing I did before I left was stand in the middle of the living room. I looked at the space. 3 years of my life, compressed into this square footage. The couch where we'd watch movies on bad winter nights. The kitchen where we'd cooked together in the early days, before cooking together became a thing only I wanted to do. The window we'd stood at once during a thunderstorm, just watching it, her leaning back against me, and I'd thought, yes, this is exactly what I want. I remembered that moment, and then I let it be a memory. I walked out. I locked the door, and at the downstairs entrance of the building, I left my key with the front desk with a note. The note said, "Please give this to the resident in 4B. No name, no explanation, no message, just the key." By the end of that week, I had signed a short-term lease on a furnished studio about 20 minutes away. It wasn't special. It was clean, it had decent light in the mornings, and it had enough space for a bed and a desk and a corner where I could eventually set up a proper space for myself. It was enough. Owen helped me move what little I had brought from the apartment. We made 2 trips in his car. When everything was in the studio, he looked around at the space and said, "Fresh start." Not cheerfully, not in a toxic positivity way, just honestly, like it was a fact. I made us coffee on a hot plate because I hadn't bought a proper coffee maker yet. We sat on the floor because I didn't have chairs yet. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like the version of myself I recognized. Not happy. I wasn't happy. I was somewhere between hollow and relieved, which is a genuinely strange combination of feelings to hold at the same time. But I was present. I was real. I was in a room that was mine, with a friend who had been honest with me when honesty mattered, drinking bad coffee on the floor of a studio apartment at 32 years old, starting from close to nothing. And it felt, strangely, like solid ground. Cassie called 4 times between Tuesday and the weekend. I let them all go to voicemail. She texted more. Some of them were explanatory, trying to give context for what she'd said, trying to frame it as something she'd said in a bad moment, a poorly chosen word, something that had come out wrong. Some of them were frustrated, asking why I wasn't responding, pointing out that it was unfair of me to disappear without having a real conversation. One of them, on Thursday evening, was different. It said, "I miss you." Simple, direct, no framing, no context, no explanation. Just that. I read it standing in the kitchen of my studio, stirring soup I was making for dinner, and I felt something. I'd be lying if I said I didn't. 3 years. You don't feel nothing when someone you spent 3 years loving texts you to say they miss you. I'm not made of stone, but I sat with the feeling, and I let myself ask the honest question, the one that emotion usually talks you out of asking. What exactly does she miss? Does she miss me? Does she miss who we were before things turned? Or does she miss the comfort, the presence, the furniture, the arrangement, the background noise of a person who loved her and stayed reliable and never left, until now? Does she miss me? Or does she miss the idea of me being there? Because whatever happened between us, I spent 3 years loving her, and you don't turn that off like a switch, and I wouldn't want to. But her not handling it the way someone who wanted it handles it, that doesn't change the reality of what she said. That doesn't erase the months before. That doesn't rewrite the coolness, the distance, the absence she maintained while I tried to close the gap. It just means she underestimated the consequence. She thought she could say that, and I would stay. She thought she could be checked out, and I would keep checking in. She thought the ending she'd already decided on in her head could coexist with me still being there physically, still being available, still being the background. And when I removed myself from the picture entirely, she discovered that she had not actually wanted what she'd been behaving like she wanted. That is genuinely sad. I mean that. But it's not something I can fix. Because to fix it, I would have to go back. And going back would mean returning to the version of our relationship she had already decided was basically over. It would mean offering my presence to someone who had been treating my presence as optional. It would mean teaching her that she could do this, check out, go cold, emotionally exit without saying so. And I would absorb it and stay and eventually be retrievable whenever she felt like. She sat across from me, wrapped both hands around her cup, and said, "I'm sorry for how that came out." I told her I appreciated that. Not just how it came out, she said after a moment. The whole way I handled the last several months. I wasn't fair to you. I nodded. She looked out the window. I don't know how to end things. I never have. I start retreating and I tell myself it's temporary, or that I'll feel differently, or that it'll come back, and then it doesn't. And by the time I realize it's not coming back, I've already been gone for so long that I don't know how to have the actual conversation. I listened. I heard it. I understood it actually. Understanding something doesn't mean it's acceptable. Understanding someone's pattern doesn't mean you have to accept being on the receiving end of it. I know, I said, and I think you'll need to work on that. Not for me, for you, and for whoever comes next. She looked at me. Is that really how you're thinking about this? Whoever comes next. I don't mean it harshly, I said. But yeah, that's where we are. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I thought you'd fight more. There it was. Right there. The truth underneath everything. She'd expected me to fight. She'd expected me to chase. She'd expected me to be so afraid of losing her that I'd absorb whatever she gave me and beg for more. And I think, in the way things become clear only in retrospect, I think she'd even been testing that. Subconsciously or not. Pulling back to see if I'd follow. Going colder to see if I'd turn up the heat. And for months, I had. Until I didn't. I did fight, I said. For months, I fought. You just didn't see it because I was fighting quietly, by myself, trying to figure out what I was doing wrong. She absorbed that. The moment you said what you said, I realized I'd been fighting for something you'd already let go of. That's not fighting. That's just hurting yourself. She didn't have an answer for that. We sat in silence for a few minutes, but it was a different kind of silence than the ones we'd shared in the apartment. This one wasn't cold. It was just honest. Two people sitting with the truth. Before we left, she said, I hope you're okay. I really do. I told her I was getting there. She looked like she believed me. And I walked out of that coffee shop and stood on the sidewalk in the winter air and breathed in and breathed out and thought, all right. Here's what I know now, a few months out from all of it. Leaving is not the same as giving up. I need that to be clear, because there's a version of this story that tries to frame it that way, that I should have tried harder, or stayed longer, or fought more loudly. But fighting harder for someone who has already decided they're done is not love. It is desperation. And desperation is not attractive to the person who's already exited, and it's not healthy for the person doing the chasing. I stayed longer than I should have. Not weeks. Months. Months of trying to close a gap she was actively, intentionally widening. And I did it because I loved her, yes, but also because I was afraid. Afraid of the empty apartment. Afraid of starting over. Afraid of what it would mean about me, about my choices, about my judgment, about my ability to keep something I valued, if it ended. That fear kept me in place long after my gut was telling me to move. And here's the bitter irony. The only reason she finally said those words out loud was probably because she could feel me starting to detach. She could feel, on some level, that I was running out of fight. And so she named it first, said it first, got there first, so she could be the one who technically said it. She's careful that way. She always was. I don't say that with anger. I genuinely don't. But I say it honestly, because I think it matters. The way some people protect themselves by never fully committing to an ending, never owning the fact that they made a choice. She made a choice. She made it months before that kitchen conversation. She'd just been waiting for a comfortable way to close the chapter without having to hold the pen. And when I looked at her and said, "Now you don't have to," when I picked up the pen and handed it back to her and walked out, I think that's when she realized what she'd actually lost. Not a background, not furniture, not a reliable constant she could take for granted. A person who had loved her genuinely and completely, who had tried to bridge every gap she created, who had swallowed his own hurt for months in the hope that she'd come back to herself. A person who, when pushed to the edge, had simply stepped off it, quietly, without drama, without making it about her. She lost someone who, even at the end, had enough self-respect to just go. The studio is mine now. Properly mine. I signed a real lease, not the short-term one. I got a coffee maker. I got chairs. I put things on the walls, things I chose, things that meant something to me, not things chosen to suit anyone else's taste. I got a plant. It survived 3 months, which is longer than I expected, and I take a ridiculous amount of satisfaction in that. Owen comes over on weekends sometimes. We watch things, cook things, talk about real things. I called my brother last week for no particular reason, just to catch up, and we talked for 40 minutes. I'm sleeping better. I finished a project at work that I'm genuinely proud of. I've been writing in that leather notebook again, the one from the desk, the one I made sure to take, and filling it with things that feel like mine again. I'm not perfectly okay. I don't think you come out of 3 years of loving someone and leaving them and come out perfectly okay on the other side. But I'm okay in the ways that matter. I am not performing recovery for anyone. I'm not trying to seem unbothered. I'm genuinely in the process of becoming someone who made a hard decision with clarity and is living with it honestly. And that feels like something. People ask sometimes, when they hear a version of this story, when they catch enough of the pieces to ask, whether I regret it. Whether I regret leaving that night, or leaving the way I did, or not giving it more time. And the answer is no. Not because the relationship wasn't worth something. It was worth a great deal to me, for a long time. But I don't regret the moment I looked at her and said those 4 words. Because those 4 words were the first completely honest thing I'd said to either of us in months. And I don't regret packing. I don't regret making sure there was nothing left in that apartment that could pull me back. Not because I wanted to be cruel, but because I knew myself. I knew that if I left loose ends, if I left things behind, reasons to return, objects scattered like breadcrumbs back to a life I needed to leave, I would find excuses to go back. And I didn't want to go back. I wanted to go forward. So I made forward the only option. I packed everything that was mine. I left my key at the front desk. I walked out of that building, and I let the door close behind me. And I did not look back. Not because I didn't care, but because I cared enough about myself to keep moving. The last thing I want to say is this. If you recognize yourself in this story, not in me, but in her, I'm not saying this to condemn you. I'm saying this because someone should say it. Checking out without saying so is a form of unkindness. It might not feel that way from the inside. It might feel like self-protection, or uncertainty, or waiting to be sure. But from the outside, it is months of someone you love trying to reach you while you're already somewhere else. It is someone quietly breaking themselves down trying to understand what they're doing wrong when the answer is simply that you've already decided. Have the conversation. Whatever it costs. Whatever it feels like. Have it. Because the alternative is what happened here. And both people deserved better than that. She texted me once more, about 2 months after the coffee shop. No context. No lead up. Just a single line. I think I understand now why you said what you said. I read it. I thought about it. I wished her well, silently. In the way you wish someone well when you mean it, but you also know there's nothing more to say. I put my phone in my pocket. I went back to what I was doing. And outside, through the window of my studio, the morning was clear and quiet and entirely mine.